Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dr. Creepy. In tonight's video, we dive into 6 most disturbing true airline horror stories, chilling encounters that unfolded thousands of feet above the ground, in places where no one can run, no one can hide, and help is hours away. From passengers who vanished mid-flight, to whispers bleeding through the intercom, to shapes drifting past cabin windows at cruising altitude, these stories reveal what people experience when the sky turns hostile. Lights moving alongside planes in the dead of night, footsteps echoing down empty aisles long after the crew sits down, strange figures seated where no passenger was assigned, and shadows watching from the wings just outside the glass. Each account exposes the terror that begins the moment the cabin door closes. If you're new here, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new true horror stories. Now get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let's begin. I never planned to camp alone near Forks. It wasn't meant to be some survival challenge or introspective journey. I was just running late. My friend Mark and I were supposed to meet at a small dispersed campsite off an old logging road before heading deeper into the Olympic rainforest the next morning. He left Seattle earlier than I did, and by the time I made it past Port Angeles, the rain had already turned the highway into a smear of headlights and wet pavement. My phone kept losing reception, but the last message I got from him said he'd already set up his tent and was turning in for the night. I tried calling once more when I reached the turnout, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I figured he was asleep. The forest swallowed my headlights the moment I left the highway. Tall firs crowded the road, dripping old rainwater onto my windshield as if the forest itself was exhaling. The GPS on my phone froze, the little arrow stuck nowhere near where it should have been. I followed the printed directions instead, creeping along the slick dirt road until a faded wooden post appeared on the left. Through the trees, I could barely see an opening that looked like a campsite. Mark's truck wasn't there. That annoyed me at first. Maybe he parked further in. Maybe he wanted to pick a better spot. I got out, my boots sinking into soft mud, and walked around with my flashlight. There were older tire tracks, but nothing fresh. My signal flickered long enough for one more failed call. I wasn't going to spend another hour hunting for him in the dark, and I couldn't drive all the way back into town. I decided to camp and deal with him in the morning. The rain had stopped, leaving everything wet and shining beneath the flashlight beam. The ground smelled like moss, cold earth, and distant salt from the coast. I set my tent on the flattest patch I could find, which still wasn't great. Roots pushed up from the ground like buried bones. When I was done, I heated a small pot of soup on my stove, listening to the occasional drip of water falling from branches. It was quiet in that way forests are quiet, layered with sounds you don't consciously hear until they stop. I crawled into my tent around midnight. I'd camped alone plenty of times, and normally the darkness didn't bother me. But that night felt different. It was heavier. Even with the rain gone, the air clung to my skin as if the forest didn't want to let me settle. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is waking to the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside my tent. At first I thought it was Mark. Maybe he arrived late and didn't want to wake me. I unzipped my sleeping bag halfway and listened. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, circling the tent. But they weren't the impatient steps of someone trying to get your attention. They were measured, almost surveying. "Mark?" I called out. The footsteps stopped immediately. The hairs rose along my arms. Mark always answered, even when trying to mess with me. Something shifted the wet leaves just outside, a soft scrape like weight sliding over mud. My mouth went dry. I reached for my flashlight, pressed it against the tent wall, and flicked it on. The beam illuminated only fabric, but I could see a faint shadow. The outline was wrong, too tall, too narrow at the bottom, like something standing at full height but leaning close. I froze. The shadow didn't move. I switched the light off, heart pounding. The footsteps resumed, continuing around the tent in the same slow rhythm. A full circle, then another. Not rushing, not wandering, pacing. Eventually the sound moved away, fading into the trees with those same methodical steps. I lay still for a long time before I dared to breathe normally again. When I finally slept, It was shallow and restless. By sunrise, I convinced myself it was just some drunk hiker or hunter wandering around. The forest was full of weirdos. It didn't mean anything. I climbed out of the tent expecting to find messy footprints or crushed debris from whoever had walked around my camp. What I found was worse. There were prints, but not shaped like boots. They were long, almost 2 feet from front to back, spaced much wider apart than any human stride. The mud showed them clearly, deep impressions, toes elongated, no heel structure. Whatever had walked around my tent had legs that didn't match any animal I knew. Mark still wasn't answering his phone. I considered leaving, but a mix of frustration and stubbornness kept me there. I had driven hours for this trip. I figured I'd pack up and find him further down the road. When I reached my car, I noticed something strange. The antenna was bent sideways, not snapped, but twisted, as though someone had grabbed it and turned it with slow, immense force. My stomach clenched. I decided I wasn't staying another night. I loaded my gear and started driving, feeling better once the forest began sliding past the windows rather than hemming me in. The sun stayed trapped behind low clouds, casting everything in muted green. The deeper I went, the narrower the logging road became. Branches scraped the sides of my car. Then, around a curve, I saw something on the side of the road. Mark's backpack. I pulled over immediately. I knew it was his. He had sewn a blue patch on the front. It was sitting upright on the mud as if someone had placed it there carefully. I picked it up. The fabric was damp but intact. His water bottle was still clipped to the side. None of the zippers were open. "Mark!" I yelled into the trees. No answer. Only the drip of water and a subtle shift of branches deeper in the brush. I searched around the area but found nothing. No tracks. No sign he'd been there. It felt staged, like someone or something wanted me to find it. I tossed the backpack into the passenger seat and resumed driving. The road curved toward a dense patch of cedar, and as I slowed to navigate it, something darted across the road. It wasn't an animal. It was tall, thin, and fast, moving with a strange jerking stride as if its limbs were too long for its body. It disappeared into the trees on the other side, not even glancing at me. I slammed on the brakes, adrenaline spiking. My breathing turned shallow. I stared at the spot where it vanished, expecting it to reappear. Nothing. I didn't dare get out. I just pressed the gas and kept driving, gripping the wheel so tight my hands ached. The forest grew thicker, darker. I tried calling again, hoping maybe Mark had hiked out somewhere with service. No signal. The road eventually ended at a barrier with a sign that warned of unstable ground. The forest beyond looked wild, untouched. There was no sign of Mark's truck. And then I heard it again. Footsteps. Not from ahead, from behind the car. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me not to look. The footsteps stopped near the back bumper. Something brushed the metal lightly, making the whole car shudder. Then a voice, soft, strained too close, said, "You weren't supposed to be here alone." My entire body locked. The voice didn't sound like Mark. It didn't sound like anyone. It was breathy, distorted, like someone learning human speech for the first time. I shifted into reverse and stomped on the gas. The car lurched backward violently, and I heard something slap against the rear window before sliding off. I kept going until the forest thinned and the logging road finally met the main highway. I didn't stop until I reached Forks, shaking uncontrollably. I reported Mark missing. Search and rescue teams combed the area for days. They found his truck parked at a pull-off nearly 4 miles from where I camped. The keys were inside. The driver's side door was open. No signs of struggle. His footprints led into the forest and simply vanished. The investigators said maybe he wandered off and fell, or got lost in the dark, or an animal dragged him. They looked at me strangely when I mentioned the footsteps outside my tent. When I told them about the prints around my campsite, they dismissed them as deformed bear tracks. I knew better. 2 days later, one of the SAR volunteers pulled me aside privately. He looked exhausted, eyes sunken with something he wasn't allowed to explain. "Whatever you heard," he said quietly, "you leave it in those woods. That area's had strange things before. Call it old stories, call it warnings, but don't go back looking for answers." I haven't. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that voice behind my car. The way it formed the words carefully, almost excitedly, like it wanted me to hear it. like it wanted me to know it was learning. And sometimes, especially on rainy nights, I imagine footsteps outside my apartment door, slow and deliberate, remembering the rhythm it used when it circled my tent. I know better than to check. I know better than to look. Some things in the Pacific Northwest don't want to be seen. Some things just want to watch. I used to think the logging roads outside Aberdeen were peaceful, empty stretches of dirt and gravel weaving through endless evergreens, the kind of place where the air feels older than anything human. I'd driven those roads countless times for work, doing safety inspections for a timber company that still clung to old rules and older maps. Most of the time, my job was boring. Check gates, check signs, check erosion, send in photos, go home. So when the company assigned me to inspect Road 12B after a landslide warning, I didn't expect anything except mud and downed branches. I didn't expect him. The morning started normally enough. Mist hung between the trees like gauze stretched across the forest. Everything smelled of wet needles and cold dirt. My truck rattled along the washboard surface as I went deeper into the hills. No houses, no cell service, no radio, just the distant groan of shifting timber and the occasional crow complaining from somewhere unseen. After about 40 minutes of driving, I reached the orange sign the company had placed the day before. Landslide risk, road unstable, use caution. I parked, grabbed my clipboard, and started walking the last stretch on foot. The forest was quiet. Too quiet, honestly. No birds, no insects, no wind. I didn't notice it at first, but somewhere around the first curve, the silence became a weight, a thick, pressing stillness that made me keep glancing over my shoulder. About half a mile in, I reached the landslide zone. A portion of the hillside had slumped toward the road, leaving broken roots hanging like exposed tendons. Mud coated the gravel. It was clearly unstable, but not as bad as I'd expected. I was kneeling down to record the slide angle when I felt it. Someone was watching me. I stood slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, nothing shifted, but every hair on my arms lifted as if the forest were holding its breath. Then I saw him, a man standing in the middle of the road about 40 feet away. He hadn't been there a moment earlier. He didn't say anything, just watched me with an expression that didn't match the situation. He wasn't confused or irritated. He looked delighted. His lips curled into a slow smile, the kind a person wears when they've been waiting for something. "Hey," I called out, trying to steady my voice. "You can't be out here. This road is closed." He didn't answer. He didn't even blink. His clothes were wrong, too. Old-fashioned work gear like something loggers wore back in the 1970s. Thick canvas coat, heavy suspenders, boots caked in mud far darker than the mud around us. The coat had a stain near the collar, deep reddish-brown spreading like dried rust. "Are you hurt?" I asked. Still no response. I took a step toward him, and that's when he spoke. His voice was low and gravelly, like someone who hadn't used it recently. "You weren't supposed to see me." The words hit my stomach like a stone. I didn't know what he meant, but every instinct told me to back away. Before I could react, he tilted his head slightly, as if studying my hesitation. Then, without another word, he stepped off the road and vanished into the trees. Not walked, not climbed, vanished. He moved so quickly and so silently that the branches didn't even sway. One second he was there, the next he was gone, swallowed by the forest. I stood frozen, mind scrambling to make sense of it. My thoughts kept looping uselessly. Maybe he was someone from another crew. Maybe he was mentally unstable. Maybe he was trying to scare me. The forest answered none of it. It just pressed in, thick and quiet. I finished the inspection as fast as I could and returned to the truck. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. The moment I started the engine, I locked every door automatically. The drive back felt longer than usual, probably because I kept checking the rearview mirror. Every time I turned around another curve, I half expected to see the man standing in the road again. Instead, the road remained empty. When I finally reached the gate at the bottom of the hill, I radioed headquarters. "Did anyone else have workers out on 12B today?" I asked. "Nope," the dispatcher said. "Full closure. You're the only one up there." "What about yesterday? Anyone doing cleanup?" "No, too unstable." "Why?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to sound paranoid or insane. That night, I tried to put it out of my mind. I cooked dinner, watched TV, tried to convince myself I'd seen a hunter or a lost hiker. People wander those woods all the time. But around midnight, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally I ignore those, but something made me pick up. A voice whispered on the other end, "You weren't supposed to see me." I hung up immediately, heart pounding. My apartment felt suddenly colder. I checked every lock twice, then unplugged my phone and set it face down. Sleep didn't come. In the morning, I told myself it was a prank call. Someone with a voice changer. Maybe even Mark from the maintenance crew messing around. But part of me knew that wasn't true. When I returned to work, the supervisor handed me a new assignment. "You're going back to 12B, he said. "Company wants you to take more photos before we send out the repair crew." I didn't want to show fear. People already joked about being superstitious in the woods. So I nodded, grabbed my gear, and drove out again. The drive felt worse this time. Every corner looked familiar in the wrong way. I kept expecting the man to step into the road again. And when I reached the landslide site, my stomach dropped. There were footprints, human footprints, fresh ones. I followed them slowly, noting how the mud had formed perfectly around each step. The prints led from the middle of the road straight into the forest, the same direction he disappeared the day before. I thought about calling it in, but I hesitated. What would I say? "There's a man who teleports into the trees." They look fresh, but I didn't hear anything. Instead, I crouched and took photos. My hands were trembling. A soft crack echoed behind me. Not a branch falling, a footstep. I turned around slowly. The man was standing 10 feet away. His expression was the same, smiling with a quiet, unsettling delight. But now I could see him more clearly. His eyes were too pale, like the color had been drained from them. The skin around them was bruised, dark like he hadn't slept in years. And his mouth didn't look right. The smile stretched too wide, as if the muscles didn't know where to stop. "How did you get here?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, silently, the way a shadow moves when the sun shifts. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. He leaned forward slightly, studying my face. Then he spoke again, the same gravelly tone. "You saw what you weren't meant to see." I don't know what you mean." His smile twitched. "You came early. You came before the others." "What others?" I choked out. He didn't explain. He only straightened, turned his head toward the deeper forest, and whispered, They're almost here. That broke whatever frozen state I'd been trapped in. I bolted for the truck, slipping twice in the mud before reaching the door. I locked myself inside, chest heaving, and started the engine. The man didn't chase me. He didn't need to. As I sped down the road, I saw movement in the trees. Shadows shifting, shapes pacing me through the forest, long limbs sliding between trunks. Too many shapes, too many legs, not human. When I reached the bottom of the hill, I nearly crashed through the closed gate in my panic. I didn't stop driving until I reached the town limits, and even then I didn't breathe easy. I went straight to the company office and demanded to see my supervisor. When I told him what I'd seen, he didn't laugh. He didn't ridicule me. Instead, his face drained of color. He opened a drawer, pulled out a faded folder, and slid it toward me. Inside was a report dated 1984. It described a logging accident on Road 12B, 3 workers missing after a slope collapse. Their bodies were never recovered. Search teams reported seeing a figure matching one worker's description standing in the forest, but every attempt to approach resulted in the figure vanishing. The last line of the report was handwritten in dark ink: "Close 12B permanently. Do not send men alone. Whatever remains out there is not human." My supervisor looked at me slowly. That road should have stayed closed. Management forced it open again last year. I told them there were reasons we left it alone. "Why didn't you warn me?" He swallowed hard. "Because most people don't see anything, and the ones who do, they don't go back to work afterward." I didn't either. I quit the next morning, filed the resignation paperwork, packed my truck, and drove away from the timberlands for good. But the story didn't end there. 2 nights later, my phone rang again. Same unknown number, same static on the line. Only this time, the voice wasn't whispering. It was right behind me. "You weren't supposed to leave." I spun around, dread crawling up my spine. Outside my apartment window, standing in the drizzle beneath the streetlight, was the man. No longer smiling, just watching. And behind him, shapes in the trees, long-limbed shadows waiting patiently. They know I saw them. They know I won't forget. And some nights, when the mist rolls in from the coast and the streets go silent, I hear footsteps outside my door, slow, deliberate, matching the rhythm of someone who had all the time in the world. I know better than to open it, but I also know this: whatever I saw on Road 12B is no longer in the forest. It's looking for me. I used to think the ferry job was boring. That's what everyone told me when I signed on as a deckhand for the night shift. The run between Kingston and Edmonds was slow, predictable, and uneventful. My cousin, who had worked ferries for years, said the biggest danger I'd face was an occasional drunk tourist leaning too far over the railing. That was before the night I saw the thing in the water. The shift started normally. Gray clouds pressed low over the Sound. The air smelled of salt and diesel, a combination I'd grown to like. The passengers that night were quiet, mostly tired commuters, a few couples heading home after dinner in the city, and one guy who slept through most of the trip with his head against the window. By the time we were on our last run of the night, the wind had picked up. Waves slapped the hull rhythmically, and fog gathered along the shoreline like rising breath. I was assigned to the bow watch, which meant I stood outside on the deck making sure no one tried anything stupid. It also meant I spent a lot of time alone. The visibility grew worse the farther we got from shore. The spray on the railings froze into thin, glassy layers, and every light looked smeared by mist. I pulled my jacket tighter and made my usual walk along the lower deck. That's when I heard it. A splash. Not a small splash, not like a seal diving or driftwood shifting. This was heavier, a deep, hollow thump against the hull, the kind of sound you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. I stopped walking. The water churned violently below me, sending ripples of white foam against the green-black waves. I leaned forward, gripping the railing, but the fog was too thick to see anything clearly. Then something surfaced. At first I thought it was a log. People underestimate how big driftwood can be in the Pacific Northwest. But logs don't rise straight up, and they don't move with purpose. A dark shape lifted out of the water, slow and deliberate. It was tall, taller than me, and dripping heavily. The surface of it gleamed in the fairy lights, slick and shiny like wet stone. For a moment, I couldn't tell if it was facing me or turned away, and then it turned its head. Its eyes reflected the deck lights like an animal's, two bright red circles shimmering above the waterline. I froze. My breath hitched painfully in my chest. The thing stared directly at me. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but I couldn't. I was stuck in place, gripping the railing so tightly the cold metal cut into my palm. The shape drifted closer, rising slightly with each swell of the waves. Then I realized something horrifying. The face wasn't a face. It looked human, but only in the way that a mask carved by someone who had never seen a real person might look human. The features were too smooth, the proportions slightly wrong. The eyes didn't blink, the mouth didn't move. Yet I could feel it studying me. The fog thickened around it, curling over the surface of the water like fingers. Slowly, silently, the thing drifted backward until it was swallowed by the mist. The eyes faded last, red pinpoints glowing through the fog like coals cooling in ash. When they finally disappeared, I stepped back from the railing so fast I nearly slipped. I didn't report it. Not then. Not with the passengers boarding, the engines rumbling, and the captain already yelling over the intercom about delays. Who would believe me? A face in the water with glowing eyes. It sounded like something pulled from a sailor's ghost story. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself I'd seen an animal. Maybe a seal with a reflection warping its appearance. Maybe a trick of light. Maybe I was tired. But the second time it appeared, I knew it wasn't any animal. 2 nights later, the weather was worse. Rain lashed the deck, and the wind howled like something alive. Most passengers stayed indoors, leaving the outer deck empty except for me. I checked the lifeboat ties, made sure the emergency latches were secured, and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling lingering in my stomach. Halfway across the Sound, the loudspeaker crackled. "Bow watch. Report to the forward deck. Check for debris." The captain's voice sounded tense. I hurried to the front, peering over the railing into the stormy dark. At first, all I saw was black water churning violently beneath us. Then a pale, round shape rose from the waves. Not glowing red eyes this time, just that same uncanny human-like face, rising straight out of the water as though lifted by invisible hands. The rain slid down its smooth surface like oil. This time it opened its mouth. The movement was jerky, wrong, like muscles moving too slowly or too fast. Inside the mouth, instead of teeth or darkness, I saw water. A deep, swirling darkness like the entrance to a drain. A low sound rolled out of it, not a scream, not a growl. Something closer to a sucking gasp, as if the entire ocean were inhaling through that mouth. The sound vibrated the rails beneath my hands. I stumbled backward, slamming into a metal panel. My radio slipped from its clip and clattered to the floor, skittering across the wet deck. I scrambled for it, hand shaking, and pressed the button. "Something's in the water! Off starboard bow, something's..." Static swallowed my words. The face sank slowly beneath the waves, as gracefully as a puppet lowered by invisible strings. The water smoothed out afterward, as if nothing had been there. When I returned to the cabin, drenched and shaking, the captain asked what I'd seen, his tone more irritated than concerned. I started to describe it, but he cut me off. "Probably a sea lion, or debris. You're tired, do your job." He didn't want the hassle. No one ever does. But the truth followed me home. 3 days later, I woke to a sound outside my apartment. Dripping. Not rain, not the gutter, just dripping, slow, rhythmic, coming from beneath my window. I hesitated before pulling back the curtain. On the street below, illuminated by a flickering street lamp, something stood directly under my window. Tall, dripping, motionless, its face tilted upward toward me. Those red eyes burned through the fog. I dropped the curtain immediately, stumbling backward so fast I crushed a lamp under my heel. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. When I finally forced myself to look again, the street was empty, just wet pavement and swirling fog. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake until sunrise, every sound outside turning my stomach. I asked to transfer to a different ferry route. My supervisor approved it without much question. Staff shortages and irregular schedules meant people switched routes all the time. For a while, it seemed like that had solved the problem. Then the nightmare started. I dreamed of the ocean. Dreamed of standing on the deck alone. Dreamed of the thing rising from the water, its smooth, too-perfect face turning toward me. But the nightmares weren't the worst part. The worst part was when I woke up one morning and found salt water pooled beneath my bedroom door. It soaked the carpet in a perfect line. Cold, clear, salty. I followed the trail through the hallway and into the living room, where it stopped at the sliding glass door. Outside, on the balcony, was a single wet footprint, longer than my forearm. Human-shaped, but wrong. The arch too narrow, the toes too long, the spacing unnatural. I shut the door, locked it twice, and backed away. The next day, I told the ferry administration I was quitting. I didn't give a reason. I didn't need to. People quit that job all the time. But leaving the ferries didn't change anything. The ocean followed me. Even hundreds of miles inland, when I visited my parents in eastern Washington, I'd hear dripping outside their farmhouse window. Sometimes I'd see a pale face watching from the edge of the field, just for a moment before it melted into the shadows. The worst encounter happened 2 months later, on a trip back to the coast. I told myself I was being brave, facing my fear. But the truth was simpler. I wanted to know if it was real. I parked near a rocky beach north of Edmonds, late at night, long after the ferries had stopped running. The moon was bright, illuminating the water in a sheet of cold silver. The waves broke quietly against the stones. For an hour, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself it had all been stress and imagination. Then the tide shifted. The water near the shoreline bulged unnaturally, rising upward as though something massive were pushing beneath it. Ripples radiated outward. The moonlight shimmered across the disturbance. A figure rose slowly from the water, not crawling, not swimming, standing. Its limbs were impossibly long, dripping dark water. Its torso stretched and twisted like something being reshaped beneath the surface. And its face, its face, rotated toward me with that smooth, unfinished expression. It opened its mouth. This time the sound wasn't a sucking gasp. It was a voice that sounded nearly human. "You saw me." My breath vanished. The thing stepped forward, water cascading from its body. Its movements were slow but deliberate, like it had learned to mimic walking by watching humans but hadn't perfected the motion. "You saw me," it repeated, tone flat but growing more certain. "You called me." I didn't call anything," I whispered. Its head twitched violently, the mouth splitting further than it should have. "You watched the water. That is calling." I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a log. The creature took another step onto the beach. "Once you see, you belong to the deep." I ran then, I didn't look back. Not once. I sprinted across the gravel, up the path, into my car. I locked the doors even before the engine turned over. By the time I drove onto the highway, my hands were numb with cold and terror. I never went back to the water after that. Not the ferry docks, not the beach, not even lakes. But the ocean doesn't forget, and whatever rose from it that night doesn't lose track of what it marks. Sometimes when I shower, the drain makes a sound it shouldn't, like something breathing just beneath the surface. Sometimes when I wash my hands, I see the faintest reflection behind me in the mirror, red eyes glowing softly through mist that isn't there. And late at night, when the world goes quiet, I hear dripping outside my window. Slow, rhythmic, closer each time. No one believes me when a Pacific Ocean wants things, that it watches, that it remembers. But I know the truth. I saw what lives beneath the waves, and it saw me too. When the airline upgraded me for free, I thought it was finally my turn for a stroke of luck. I'd been traveling constantly for months, bouncing between airports and hotel rooms until the days blurred together. When the email arrived saying my seat had been moved from economy to business class as an accommodation for operational reasons, I almost laughed. I never got chosen for anything good. I figured maybe this was the universe offering me a small break. I had no idea what I was actually walking into. The flight was overnight, one of those long hauls where most people sleep the entire way if they can. The gate was unusually quiet for an international departure. The lights seemed dimmer than usual, and only a handful of passengers lingered near the seating area. A strange hush hung over everything. Even the workers at the desk looked tense, speaking in clipped whispers while glancing toward the jet bridge as if expecting something to emerge from it. When boarding was called, they rushed through each group faster than normal. I was among the first to step onto the plane. The moment I entered, I noticed a scent I couldn't place. Not foul, not chemical, just cold. Like walking into a basement sealed for too long but still somehow ventilated. The cabin lights flickered briefly overhead. I found my seat in business class, 7A. A comfortable wide seat with an enormous amount of space. The seat across from me, 7B, was empty at first. I had the aisle to myself, so I settled in, stowed my bag, and enjoyed the rare silence. About 5 minutes later, a man slid into 7B, though I hadn't seen him approach. He must have slipped in while I was distracted adjusting my seat controls. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anything. He simply sat down slowly, carefully, even gently, like someone who had practiced the exact motion dozens of times. His clothes were neat but old-fashioned, slightly outdated suit jacket and a tie with a faded pattern. He buckled his seatbelt without glancing down. Something about him made me uneasy, but I forced myself not to judge a stranger on a plane. Lots of people were odd flyers. A flight attendant walked by moments later and paused when she saw him. Not in a friendly greeting way, more like she'd been expecting someone else in that seat. Her eyes narrowed the slightest bit before she snapped back into her professional smile and continued walking. I tried to shake off the tension creeping up my spine. Boarding continued. People shuffled down the aisle with tired expressions. One woman gasped softly when she glanced toward my row, then quickly looked away. I thought she must be afraid of flying, but her eyes lingered too long on 7B, not me. Soon enough, we were preparing for takeoff. The attendants passed through quietly, checking seatbelts, securing luggage, giving thin smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. When one reached my row, she hesitated again, glancing between me and the man beside me. "Is everything all right?" I whispered. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "If you need anything, press the call button," she said, "as soon as you need it." Her tone made it sound like she wasn't offering assistance, but a lifeline. The man in 7B did not respond. He stared straight ahead as if frozen in time. The plane taxied, engines building their familiar rumble. The man's posture never shifted, not even a sway from the motion. As we took off, the cabin lights dimmed automatically. Shadows stretched across the aisle, and the man beside me finally blinked. His eyes opened too slowly and closed too slowly, as if the motion was foreign to him. I turned my face toward the window and stared out into the black sky, trying to steady my breathing. We reached cruising altitude. People settled in. A few took off their shoes, others reclined. The attendant started service unusually early, rushing through with carts of drinks. When they came to our row, the attendant gave me water, but didn't even attempt to offer anything to 7B. She barely looked at him, but her jaw clenched visibly as she passed by. I leaned slightly toward the man. "Do you want something to drink?" I whispered. His head turned toward me, only a few inches, but far too smoothly. No hesitation, no natural tension of muscles, just a slow, perfect glide of motion. His eyes met mine. They were wrong, not empty, not dead, just wrong, too dark, too focused, as if he'd been waiting for me to acknowledge him. "No," he said. His voice was soft, but it carried a resonance that felt off, like two tones blended together. I looked away immediately. Something instinctual told me not to engage again. The cabin darkened further as the attendants shut off most lights, leaving us in the soft glow of the emergency aisle fixtures. People drifted into sleep. I tried closing my eyes, but every few minutes I felt eyes on me. I'd open them and find 7B staring forward, but something in my chest told me he had been looking at me. After about an hour, the intercom clicked on. I expected the captain. Instead, a low static filled the speakers. Not the usual fuzzy interference. This was rhythmic, pulsing, almost like breathing. A few passengers stirred. The static deepened. Then it stopped abruptly. The cabin lights flickered, and a voice whispered through the speakers, "Stay in your seats." It was not the captain. It was not human. Every hair on my body rose. The tone was hollow, distant, layered with something like a faint echo. Passengers murmured nervously. Someone pressed their call button. No attendants came. The intercom clicked again. This time the voice whispered something else, quieter, harsher. "Do not turn around." I swallowed hard. People looked at each other in confusion. A man across the aisle whispered, "What the hell does that mean?" The plane jolted violently as if hit from below. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. The man in 7B didn't react at all. Not a flinch, not a blink. The plane jolted again, harder. The lights flickered violently. A drink splashed onto the carpet near row 5. Someone screamed. The intercom clicked once more. "They are moving." Passengers shouted for attendants, but none answered. The aisle was empty. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps coming from the rear of the plane. Not the measured click of flight attendants, not the scuffle of a passenger. These steps sounded wrong, dragging, uneven, as if something long and heavy trailed behind each movement. My pulse hammered in my throat. I sat rigid, staring forward. The footsteps grew closer. The aisle lights flickered, one by one, dimming as the sound approached. A woman near row 12 began to sob. Her husband shushed her frantically. The footsteps reached row 10, row 9, row 8. They stopped behind us, directly behind row 7. Breath prickled the back of my neck. I felt something cold move the air just slightly behind my head. Every instinct screamed not to turn around. The intercom crackled again. "Do not acknowledge them." A low moan resonated from behind us, deep, elongated, vibrating through the floor. People whimpered softly. A baby cried. The footsteps resumed, moving toward the front of the plane. The thing, whatever it was, dragged something along the floor as it moved. Something that scraped metal. As the footsteps reached the front galley, the lights flickered violently and went fully dark for half a second. When they returned, everything was silent. The plane flew smoothly again, but I knew the calm was fake. Forced. Wrong. The man beside me finally spoke. "They're watching us." I flinched. His voice was softer now, almost gentle. His head was still turned forward. "Who?" I whispered. He didn't blink. "They were here before us." A shudder rippled down my spine. "You mean on the plane?" He nodded slightly. "But how? Where?" He slowly tilted his head, as if listening to the creaks and hums around us. Then he whispered, "They never leave. They follow the lights. They follow the routes. They move when the cabin dims." I almost pressed the call button, but what good would that do? No attendants had been visible for nearly 20 minutes. Just then, the lights flickered again. The cabin dropped into almost complete darkness, except for the faint floor lighting. A woman screamed. Another voice, this one male, shouted, "Enough! Turn the lights on." The lights snapped back in a bright flash, and row 11 was empty, completely empty. 4 seats, all occupied earlier. Gone, no luggage, no people, just empty seats and open seat belts. Someone screamed. Another person cried out, asking where they went. Panic swelled at once. People stood, stumbling into the aisle, yelling for attendants, for the captain, for anyone. The intercom blared sharply, "Stay seated." The voice came louder this time, deeper, almost angry, but no one listened. Rows of terrified passengers scrambled toward the cabin door. The lights flickered again. Darkness washed through the cabin. When they lit up again, rows 10 and 11 were empty. 8 people gone, completely vanished. People trampled over seats to get away from the center of the cabin. Someone climbed onto a seat and tried to reach the overhead bin. Others pushed down the aisle, sobbing, screaming. I snapped my head toward 7B. He still hadn't moved, not 1 inch. He stared forward with a calmness that terrified me more than the disappearance of entire rows. "What's happening?" I forced out. His lips parted slowly. "They're feeding." My stomach dropped so fast I nearly threw up. Before I could respond, the plane shook violently. The oxygen masks dropped with a mechanical hiss. Lights flickered spastically. Then, darkness. Something crawled across the ceiling. A shadow with no shape, no form, just movement, fast, skittering, unnatural. It zipped above us, and passengers screamed as its shadow passed overhead. The plane lurched downward. A deep groan echoed through the fuselage like metal bending under pressure. Then I felt something. Breath. Not from me. Not from 7B. Cold breath on the side of my neck. My muscles locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, not even blink. "Them," the man beside me whispered calmly. "They're choosing." I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The breath grew colder, closer. Then, suddenly, a loud metallic bang snapped through the cabin. The lights returned in an instant, and row 6 was gone. The man in 7B looked toward me for the first time with something almost like sadness. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "They aren't here for you yet." Yet. I choked out. He nodded once. "Everyone is chosen eventually." The plane rolled sharply. People slammed against seats. Suitcases fell from overhead bins. More shadows crawled across the walls. The intercom erupted again. "Remain seated." But this time, I recognized the voice. It was the captain's voice, or what sounded like it used to be. Cracked, hollow, distorted by layers of inhuman undertone. Something slammed into the side of the aircraft with a deafening impact. A wing dipped. People toppled over. A man smashed into the aisle's edge and cried out. The cabin dimmed again. Row 5 vanished. The breathing returned, this time all around me. Close. Too close. People screamed as invisible hands brushed their faces, pulled at their clothes, lifted them from their seats. The plane fell into a sudden descent. Alarms blared. Lights stuttered. The oxygen masks bounced wildly in the turbulence. Through all of it, 7B remained perfectly still folded hands, still serene expression. "You need to close your eyes," he said, "now." I squeezed my eyelids shut, tears streaming uncontrollably. The plane shook violently, like something was clawing at the wings, tearing at the metal. Screams filled the cabin. Then, silence. Gradually, I opened my eyes. The plane was on the ground, still, silent. But wrong. We were not at an airport. The windows showed nothing but vast, empty darkness stretching in every direction, broken only by faint, distant lights wandering slowly across a flat surface. Not runway lights, not buildings, moving lights, like lanterns carried by something walking. The cabin was nearly empty. Most seats were vacant. Everyone who had stood was gone. Only a handful of passengers remained, trembling, too afraid to move. And 7B, still sitting, still staring forward. I unbuckled slowly. "Where are we?" I whispered. He didn't move, but after a long pause, he whispered, "Closer." I crawled out of my seat, barely able to breathe. As I turned toward the front, I risked one last glance at 7B. He turned his head toward me and smiled, but it wasn't a human smile. It stretched too wide, too long, too wrong. The intercom crackled one final time. "You may now exit the aircraft." The night it started, I was working the late dispatch shift, December 18th, a quiet Tuesday, the kind where the phones barely ring and the clock seems frozen. I had logged almost 10 hours already, drinking stale coffee that tasted like metal and trying to stay awake while listening to the radio chatter from the patrol cars. Every so often, I'd get a call about a lost dog or a minor fender bender on the ice, but nothing major. Winter nights were slow. Around 2:21 a.m., the call came in. I remember the exact time because the monitor flickered slightly when it happened, a glitch that never occurs on our system. A number flashed across the screen. Unknown caller, no location data. For dispatchers, that's extremely rare. Even blocked or private numbers still show a coordinating tower. This had nothing, just a blank space. I hesitated, then answered. 911, what's your emergency? What came through wasn't a voice. It was a long, shaking breath, wet, ragged, painful. Not like someone scared or crying, more like freezing. I straightened in my chair. Hello? Can you hear me? Another breath, colder, sharper. I swear I could feel the temperature drop around me just listening to it. Then a whisper finally pushed through the static. Help me. The words were thin, stretched, trembling as though the speaker was struggling to move their lips at all. Sir, are you injured? Tell me where you are. There was a faint crackling sound, wind maybe, and then the whisper again. Please, it's cold. My eyes flicked to the screen again, still no coordinates, still no data. Sir, I need you to tell me what you see. Are you inside, outside, in a vehicle? There was a rattling gasp, then water. The word came out strangled, then a cough. A horrible, choking sound. Are you in water? Silence. Then another breath, this time with a wet gurgle underneath it. Frozen, water. Something snapped inside me. I leaned forward, heart pounding. Sir, listen to me. Are you on a lake? Did you fall through ice? A faint whimper answered me, a pitiful, terrified sound. Yes. That one word chilled me. People fall through ice sometimes, but rarely at 2 in the morning, and never without calling from a real phone with a real signal. Stay calm. Don't move more than you have to. It can make you sink faster. Are you alone? Please help. Tell me which lake you're on. There were dozens in our region. Some were small ponds, some were large reservoirs. If he didn't tell me, he'd be dead long before help found him. I heard scraping on the line, metal on ice maybe, and the voice strained. It's dark. I tried again. Look around. Do you see lights, houses, a shoreline? His answer was a whisper so faint I barely caught it. None of this was here. That made no sense. What do you mean? He inhaled sharply, like something brushed against him. The lake. This lake, I knew it. It wasn't here. Panic tightened his voice, as if he had just realized something truly awful. It shouldn't be here. My hands went cold. Sir, stay with me. Focus on your breathing. He cried then, quiet, desperate sobs muffled by freezing water. Please, I can't. Hold on. I flagged the call to my supervisor, signaling an active emergency with no location. He looked at my monitor, confused. Try again, he mouthed, tapping the signal icon. I did. Tell me your name. No answer. Sir, stay awake. Tell me your name. Finally, he whispered. Anthony. Anthony, I'm going to find you, but I need you to listen closely. Tell me the last place you remember being before this happened. A long pause, then broken, driving. Okay, what road? His voice cracked. Old Birch Road. My stomach tightened. Old Birch Road ran near a lake, but that lake didn't freeze solid. It was deep, moving water fed by a year-round stream. People fished there in summer, but it never froze enough to walk on. The dispatcher next to me must have overheard because she turned, eyes wide. Old Birch Lake was 24 feet deep in the shallows alone. No one could fall through ice that shouldn't exist. Anthony, listen to me. Are you sure you're on Old Birch Lake? Another sob. It wasn't a lake before. It was a road. A road? My skin crawled. Anthony, where did you park your vehicle? A horrible, choking cry burst through the line. It's under the ice. My mouth went dry. I felt a wave of nausea. Before I could ask more, a new sound flooded the line. Loud, violent cracking. Ice tearing apart. Anthony, stay still, he screamed. A sound so raw, so full of agony that everyone in the dispatch room froze. Even the radios went silent. Then, abruptly, the scream cut out. All that remained was that same cold, shaky breathing. Then a whisper that didn't sound like him anymore. Too cold, and the line disconnected. I sat frozen, staring at the monitor. The call timer read exactly 3 minutes, but the call log showed something strange. Call date, December 18th, 1998. Caller status, deceased. I rubbed my eyes so hard they burned. That had to be a glitch, some system error. The last time dispatch updated its software was in the early 2000s. It wasn't impossible, but my supervisor saw it too. "That's not right," he whispered. We pulled up the archived records manually. Twice, 3 times. Same result. According to the system, the last person to call from that number 27 years ago was Anthony Wilkes, who had drowned after driving into a frozen lake during a freak winter storm. A frozen lake that existed only because that storm had created a massive ice overflow, submerging part of Old Birch Road beneath a flash freeze. A lake that had disappeared days later when rescue teams broke through the ice to recover the bodies. The road hasn't flooded since. The lake hasn't existed since. And Anthony had died long before I ever heard his voice. We sat there, stunned, replaying the audio. The timestamp still insisted it was from December 18th, 1998, but the sound quality was modern, crystal clear, as if the call wasn't old, as if it happened in real time. But the true horror wasn't the timestamp, it was what happened next. At 2:21 a.m. the following night, the phone rang again. Same number, same blank caller ID, same lack of signal. I answered with trembling hands. 911, what's? The same breath, the same rattling cold, the same voice. But this time, he didn't ask for help. He whispered my name. I slammed the phone down. A minute later, it rang again. Same number. I didn't answer. It rang every night after that, always at 2:21 a.m. Always that same breath on the voicemail, growing slower, weaker, wetter, like something freezing and sinking deeper with each attempt to speak. The worst night was December 23rd. The voicemail was 9 seconds long, 7 seconds of silence. Then, barely audible, "Found you." I didn't sleep for days. I got a leave of absence from dispatch and stayed with my sister 2 towns over. I tried convincing myself it was lingering trauma from late shift stress, winter isolation, too much caffeine. But 2 nights later at her house, the landline rang. At 2:21 a.m., her caller ID showed unknown caller. She picked up before I could stop her. I heard nothing, no breathing, no voice, until she slowly lowered the phone, face pale. "What's wrong?" I whispered. She swallowed hard. He said someone is waiting for you near the water." My spine turned to ice. Her house is nowhere near a lake. No rivers, no ponds, nothing. Until that night. Because when I looked outside past her porch, past the quiet street, I saw something impossible reflecting under the street lamp. Ice. A thin, spreading sheet of frozen water creeping across the pavement, growing, reaching toward her front door. I haven't heard the voice since. But every December I find thin patches of frost forming perfect circles under whichever window I sleep near. And sometimes, just before dawn, I hear it again. One faint, drowning breath. I used to love storms on the Oregon coast. When I was a kid, I'd sit on the back porch of my parents' house in Yakuts and watch the waves smash against the basalt rocks, like the ocean was trying to claw its way onto the land. The wind would howl around the eaves, rattling the windows, and I'd fall asleep to the rhythm of rain hammering the roof. But the storm last November wasn't like any storm I'd grown up with. If I'm being honest, it didn't feel like weather at all. I had moved back to Yakuts after 15 years working inland. My parents had passed away, and the house was sitting empty, half swallowed by moss and ocean wind. It felt wrong letting it rot, so I took a few months off from work and returned to fix it up. Patch the shingles, repaint the siding, replace the windows that had fogged over permanently from salt air. I arrived in late October. Locals said storms had been coming in harder that year, stronger than anyone remembered. The ocean was rougher, the tides higher, but people always say that. Every generation thinks their storms are worse. The first 2 weeks were quiet, rainy, windy, typical coast stuff. I slept better than I had in years. Then the forecast warned of a major storm making landfall on November 12th, a cyclone-strength front sweeping up from the Pacific. They said it was the kind of storm that blows over power poles and floods basements. They didn't mention anything about the humming, or the lights in the fog, or the voices. The storm hit at 9:17 p.m., the power went out at 9:21. And at 9:28, something began knocking on the side of the house. Not wind, not branches, a deliberate knock. 3 steady thuds against the siding directly beneath my bedroom window. I sat up in bed immediately. The knock came again, 3 taps in the same slow rhythm. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped quietly to the window, heart pounding. I expected to see branches slamming against the house, or maybe a loose shutter flapping in the wind. But outside was nothing but dark, swirling rain. The porch light was out, the street was out. The world beyond the window was a shapeless black mass, and still, tap, 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 below my window. Someone was outside, standing in the storm. I stepped back from the glass, the knocking stopped. A gust of wind screamed across the yard, and for a moment I heard something underneath it. Something like a voice. Muffled, garbled, not words, just a low moaning vibration that made my teeth ache. I backed away slowly, trembling, and grabbed my phone. No signal, no data, no emergency service. The storm was blocking everything. I stayed awake until about 3 a.m., listening to the wind scrape across the house like fingers dragging along the siding. But no more knocking, no more voices, just darkness and rain. By morning, the storm had calmed to a drizzle, and the world outside looked washed raw. Trees fallen, debris scattered, the beach littered with seaweed and twisted branches. I went outside to check for damage. When I walked around to the side of the house beneath my window, I froze. There were footprints, bare footprints, large, human-shaped, but too long, and too deep for someone standing lightly. Water pooled in each one, rippling slightly even though the wind was calm. The prints led away from the house and disappeared into the forest trail behind the property. My throat tightened. Who the hell would stand in a cyclone barefoot? I followed the footprints a few feet down the trail, but they ended abruptly, like the person had simply stopped existing. No drag marks, no running, no turning. The mud was undisturbed further on. I went back inside and locked every door. That night, the humming started. At first, it was faint, so low it felt more like pressure in my ears than a sound. It came from somewhere behind the house, a deep vibration that rattled the floorboards. It made the windows hum and the drywall quiver like there was a generator running just outside. But when I looked out the back door, there was nothing, just darkness and fog. Around midnight, the humming intensified, and someone started whispering outside the bathroom window. I couldn't make out the words, just a soft, wet murmuring that rose and fell like someone talking to themselves. I wanted to call the sheriff. I really did. But the storm had knocked out the cell tower, and the landlines had been dead for months. The whispering continued for nearly 20 minutes, moving slowly along the wall from one window to the next. I sat on the floor with a hammer in one hand, listening. Finally, the whispering stopped. The humming continued a while longer, then faded out gradually. The next morning, something was waiting for me on the back porch. A stone, smooth, gray, shaped like a teardrop, and carved into it was a spiral symbol, shallow, crude cuts spiraling tightly inward. When I picked it up, it was warm, warm like it had been held. I tossed it into the ocean. That night, the lights came. I was in bed reading by lantern glow when a flash lit up the entire bedroom. It wasn't lightning. Lightning is sharp, bright, instantaneous. This light was duller, pulsing, fog-colored. I stepped to the window. Down near the trees, lights moved through the fog, slow, hovering glows drifting between the branches. Not quite white, not quite blue, more like the color of a dead fish's eye. They bobbed gently like lanterns being carried by something that couldn't decide how fast to walk. I stared, frozen. Then I heard something behind the lights. Footsteps, dozens of them. Wet, heavy steps slapping the ground in an uneven rhythm. Closer, closer. I backed away from the window, breath shaking. And then, a shape stepped out of the fog and into full view of the porch light, which flickered weakly with the last voltage in the line. The shape was human, or had been. Tall, soaked. Skin sagging loosely like clothing a size too big, its head hung too far forward, its limbs bent too fluidly, its chest rose and fell in slow, unnatural motions. And its mouth was wrong. Too long, too wide, split slightly at the corners, dripping salt water. It turned toward my window. Its eyes were black, not dark, black, like something had scooped out the original eyes and replaced them with polished stones. I dropped to the floor, heartbeat booming in my ears. It moved closer to the house, the porch boards creaked. Then a voice, if you could call it a voice, scraped out of its throat. You threw it back. I clamped both hands over my mouth to keep from screaming. Another shape appeared behind it, then another, then another. 5 shapes in total, all tall, all soaked, all wrong in the same way. They surrounded the house. Light pulsed around them. Fog swirled unnaturally. The air felt heavy, like a wave hovering above me, waiting to crash. They began circling the cabin. Slow, dragging footsteps. I sat against the bedroom wall, hammer trembling in my grip. The footsteps moved from window to window. Each time a voice whispered from outside, "Come, out. We saw you. You belong." The porch boards groaned. Something pressed against the bedroom door. A long, wet finger slid beneath the crack at the bottom. I ran. I locked myself in the bathroom and pressed my back against the tub. The window glass shook violently as something outside pounded on it, not trying to break in, but trying to call attention. Tap, tap, tap. You threw it back. The knocking turned to scraping. Claws, fingernails, something dragging slowly across the window pane. Minutes passed, or hours. Time dissolved into fear. Finally, the noises stopped. The lights faded. The fog receded. By dawn, the house was silent. I waited until full daylight before leaving the bathroom. Outside, the porch was covered in wet footprints. Same 2 long toes, same unnatural shape. But this time, they weren't walking away. They were circling. Over and over and over. Around and around the cabin. Like they'd been waiting for me to open the door. I packed in under 5 minutes. I didn't care what I left behind. I didn't call anyone. I didn't lock the door. I didn't give myself time to think. I drove until the ocean was far behind me. But here's the part I can't shake. 2 nights ago, in my new apartment in Salem, I woke to a sound. A humming. Low. Vibrating. Familiar. I sat up in bed. My window was fogged over from the outside, and when I wiped the glass clear, there was a stone on my windowsill. Gray, smooth, warm, with a spiral carved into it, and behind the stone, reflected faintly in the glass, something tall moved in the fog outside the building. Searching, waiting, listening for the storm to return, because it didn't belong to the weather, it belonged to me, and it knows where I live now.